Among the many teenagers who once filled America's living rooms, Peggy Leonard caught the eye not with flash or fame, but with a quiet grace that set her apart. She was petite, almost delicate, yet on the bandstand floor her movements carried a sincerity that made her unforgettable. When she leaned into the rhythm beside Frank Levins or Frankie Lobis, it was as if the music had found its perfect partner. Fans saw in her a girl who looked like their classmate, their neighbor, someone ordinary, suddenly made extraordinary by the glow of television. She appeared in teen magazines, her name whispered in fan clubs, a reminder that stardom could belong to anyone. And yet, Peggy did not remain in that spotlight. After the applause faded, she chose a path of quiet work and private life. How does a dancer so visible disappear so completely? That mystery is her story. Peggy Leonard's beginnings were rooted in the everyday life of Philadelphia, a city alive with energy at the turn of the 1950s. Row houses pressed close together, the sound of trolleys rattled through the streets, and radios poured out the new sound of rock and roll. In that working-class setting, Peggy grew up as a girl both shy and spirited, learning early how music could lift her out of the ordinary. She was remembered as small in stature, but strong in presence, a girl who rarely sought attention until the music started playing. At family gatherings, she would slip onto the worn carpet of the living room, spinning gently as the radio hummed with the latest hits of Elvis Presley or Fats Domino. Neighbors might have seen only a quiet teenager, but those who knew her better recognized how her face lit up whenever a rhythm took hold. Her family provided the balance that kept her grounded. Like so many households in post-war Philadelphia, theirs valued hard work and modest ambition. School came first, chores came next, yet Peggy's parents never discouraged the happiness she found in music. They may have worried about the distractions of television, but they understood that her dancing was a harmless joy. Those evenings of practice, Peggy turning in time to the music while the rest of the family talked around her, were rehearsals for something far larger than anyone could have predicted. What mattered most in her childhood was not a hunger for fame, but a hunger for belonging. She wanted to feel the beat, to share in the spirit that seemed to sweep through every teenager of her generation. She did not dream yet of national television. She dreamed of freedom, of dance halls, of friendships built around music. That simple life, radio tunes, school books, and sidewalks filled with laughter, was about to be transformed. For Peggy Leonard, the next step would carry her from the safety of her family home straight into the dazzling lights of American Bandstand. For teenagers in Philadelphia, the whispers about American Bandstand were impossible to ignore. Studio B, tucked in West Philadelphia, had become a magnet for kids who wanted to dance, to be seen, or simply to breathe the same air as the music pouring through television sets each afternoon. For Peggy Leonard, curiosity was her first invitation. She listened as friends described the crowds outside the studio and the chance to appear, if only for a moment, on national TV. Soon she joined the line herself. The first time she stood outside Studio B, Peggy felt the pulse of something extraordinary. Girls in pressed skirts adjusted their hair, boys practiced dance steps on the pavement, and laughter spilled across the block. When the doors opened, the thrum of music met her ears, and she stepped into a room that seemed brighter than anything she had ever known. Cameras swung overhead, lights poured down, and every teenager inside carried the same mix of nerves and excitement. When Peggy took her first turn on the floor, it was not about performance, but about surrendering to rhythm. She wasn't trying to outshine anyone. She simply moved with ease beside her partner, letting the music lead. Yet for those watching at home, her presence was undeniable. Her gentle smile and graceful poise made her stand out in a sea of dancers. To the audience, she was relatable, not a star set apart, but a girl who looked like she could live just down the street, suddenly transformed by the glow of television. That first broadcast appearance gave Peggy something she had not expected, the realization that she belonged on that floor. She was no longer just a teenager listening to songs on the family radio. She was part of the soundtrack of a generation. The nervous girl who once spun across her living room carpet had stepped into the nation's living rooms, and the world of American Bandstand would never look quite the same to her again. By 1960, Peggy Leonard had moved beyond the role of a newcomer. She was one of those faces viewers began to recognize week after week, the kind of dancer who anchored the atmosphere of American Bandstand without ever demanding the spotlight. Petite and modest, she radiated a natural grace that made her stand out in ways more dramatic personalities sometimes failed to achieve. Her partnerships gave her presence even greater dimension. With Frank Levins, she appeared balanced and assured, his tall frame and steady lead providing the perfect counterpoint to her light, fluid movements. Together, they created a visual harmony that seemed almost choreographed, even though it was spontaneous. With Frankie Lobis, she displayed a different energy, playful, unguarded, full of youthful spark. Fans noticed the change, and soon Peggy and Frankie were mentioned together in letters, scrapbooks, and magazines. Even decades later, collectors of early bandstand memorabilia would point to photos of the pair as evidence of their easy chemistry. On screen, Peggy's style was subtle yet unforgettable. She didn't rely on flashy spins or exaggerated gestures. Instead, her gift was in making every movement look effortless, as if the music itself carried her across the floor. The kinescope from February 1960 captures this perfectly. Peggy leaning slightly into her partner's rhythm, her smile soft but radiant, creating a moment that felt authentic and timeless. Beyond the cameras, her presence filtered into teen culture. She appeared in My Bandstand Buddies, the 1959 magazine created by fellow dancer Pat Melitieri, proof that she was considered part of the show's core circle. Fan clubs included her name, and her image appeared in group photos alongside the most popular regulars of the era. For viewers, Peggy symbolized accessibility. She was the girl next door, who just happened to be dancing on their television screens each afternoon. What made Peggy's peak so memorable was that she did not need to reinvent herself. Her quiet charm was her identity, and it resonated with an audience who saw their own lives reflected in her. She was not a star in the Hollywood sense, but she was a star to the teenagers who eagerly tuned in, hoping to catch a glimpse of her moving across the floor. Her time on Bandstand defined her generation's afternoons, yet her story was far from complete. The real heart of Peggy Leonard's legacy would reveal itself in the bonds she built and the behind-the-scenes memories that still echo today. To many who tuned in during those golden afternoons, Peggy Leonard was rarely seen without a partner. On the floor, she seemed to come alive most fully when dancing alongside others, and it was these partnerships that etched her into the memory of fans. With Frank Levins, she formed a pairing that looked almost cinematic, his height and calm steadiness framing her smaller, graceful figure. Their movements together seemed to tell a story of balance and trust, and viewers wrote to magazines noting how natural their chemistry appeared. Her partnership with Frankie Lobis added another layer to her image. Frankie's playful energy contrasted with Peggy's gentleness, and together they created moments that looked spontaneous and joyful, as if the music was their private conversation. Photos of the two, preserved decades later, still capture that spark, a reminder of how two ordinary teenagers became extraordinary simply by stepping onto the bandstand floor. There was Harvey Robbins, too, a dancer known for his strong presence. Standing next to him, Peggy looked even more petite, yet she never faded. Instead, she adjusted, complementing his style with her light touch, proving her adaptability and quiet confidence. Each partnership revealed a different side of her, and fans delighted in seeing how she seemed to shine no matter who led her through the rhythm. Off-camera, Peggy shared the same teenage rituals as her fellow regulars. She waited anxiously to see if the cameras would catch her during a favorite song. She laughed during commercial breaks when a misstep drew good-natured teasing from friends. She followed the strict rules of the studio, careful not to overstep the boundaries that kept the show's image clean. And like others, she found herself in fan magazines, sometimes featured, sometimes simply part of a group photo that now serves as a time capsule of an era. What mattered most behind the scenes was the community. Peggy belonged to a circle of dancers who forged bonds in the margins of fame. Pat Melitieri, Franny Giordano, Dottie Horner, and so many others. Together, they created a family within the studio walls. For Peggy, those friendships and moments of laughter were as significant as any time on camera. Yet, as bright as those afternoons were, the question lingered. How long could the dance floor define a life? Peggy, like so many of her peers, would soon face the quiet turning point that separated memory from reality. For Peggy Leonard, the shift away from American Bandstand was not sudden, but gradual, almost like a song fading out. One week she was a familiar presence beside Frank Levins or Frankie Lobis, and then, slowly, her appearances became less frequent. Viewers who looked for her face in the sweep of the camera found it missing, and soon she was gone altogether. The reasons were both practical and universal. School demanded more time, and family responsibilities often clashed with the program's strict attendance rules. Being a regular required not just talent, but consistency, and life outside the studio could be unforgiving. For Peggy, whose nature was always modest and grounded, the realities of teenage life began to outweigh the thrill of television exposure. She had always loved dancing, but she understood that the glamour of the show could not last forever. There was also the quiet pressure that came with being seen by millions. Even for someone as gentle as Peggy, the expectation to look perfect week after week was exhausting. Some regulars chased more attention through teen magazines or public appearances, but Peggy seemed content to let the glow fade. She did not cling to the spotlight, she simply chose to move on. Her departure left a ripple among fans. Letters slowed, questions spread in fan clubs, and yet Peggy never explained herself publicly. That silence, in its own way, became part of her mystique. She was the girl who danced, who smiled, who then stepped away without spectacle. For Peggy, leaving Bandstand was not an end but a passage. She walked away with friendships, memories, and the satisfaction of knowing she had been part of something larger than herself. And beyond the cameras, a new life was waiting, one built not on applause but on the steadier rhythms of work and community. When Peggy Leonard stepped away from the cameras, she did not chase the fragments of fame she had known as a teenager. Instead, she embraced a life that valued stability over spotlight. She built a career in banking, working with institutions such as PNC, Core States, and First Union. In the structured world of finance, she became known not as the girl who once danced on TV, but as a reliable colleague, professional and steady. It was a world far removed from the swirl of skirts and the hum of Studio B, yet it reflected her quiet determination. Outside the office, Peggy was remembered for the same warmth and accessibility that once defined her on Bandstand. Friends and family spoke of her as approachable, loyal, and genuine. The girl who had danced in front of millions found her greatest joy in the smaller rhythms of everyday life, neighborhood gatherings, family meals, simple celebrations. In those spaces, she carried the same gentle smile viewers remembered from the dance floor. Though Peggy never returned to the national stage, her connection to Bandstand endured through the memories of fans. Scrapbooks, kinescope footage, and magazine clippings kept her image alive. For those who had once written her name into fan clubs or spotted her beside Frank Levins in a fleeting camera shot, she remained forever young, frozen in that black and white glow. Her later years were private, and she chose to live them without the weight of nostalgia. Yet when she passed away on January 13, 2004, at the age of 61, her obituary noted her as one of the original Bandstand dancers. It was a small acknowledgement, but also a lasting recognition. Peggy Leonard would always be part of that story. Her life after Bandstand was a reminder that meaning can be found not only in fame, but also in the quiet dignity of work, friendship, and family. She left behind not only memories of her dances, but a legacy of living life on her own terms. Peggy Leonard's journey proves that a legacy does not need to be measured in headlines or fame. On American Bandstand, she was part of a mosaic of teenagers who helped shape the soundtrack of a generation. Petite and graceful, she stood out not because she demanded attention, but because she embodied something real. The girl next door, whose smile and steps carried authenticity. For millions of viewers, she was a familiar face in the afternoons of their youth. Her decision to step away did not erase her impact. If anything, it made her story more poignant. Peggy showed that life after the cameras could be just as meaningful as the brief moment in front of them. She built a life defined by family, work, and quiet dignity, and yet, the memories of her dances remain preserved in kinescopes, photographs, and the recollections of those who watched her. Were you watching when Peggy Leonard glided across the floor on American Bandstand? What songs or moments do you still remember from those days? Share your memories with us in the comments. And if these stories bring back the glow of your youth, subscribe to American Bandstand Memories so you won't miss the next chapter in this journey through time.